pleasure of welcoming you here. Congratulations on finding the room. Congratulations on finding the session, and thank you for your patience throughout the day. I know I think this is the third time it's appeared in the schedule, so thank you for hanging in there with us. I'm so delighted to be here at the second Karachi Literature Festival. I had the great fortune to be here last year, and I'm thrilled to be back, and especially honored to have the chance to sit here and have the chance to discuss with Mohammed Hanif on my left. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about Hanif's varied and dynamic career, and then we will have a little discussion. I'm going to ask Hanif some questions, and then I hope that you will all, I know you are burning with questions to ask him as well. So start thinking about the questions that you want to ask, and we will turn it over to you. I wanted to tell you that Mohammed Hanif was born in Okara, Pakistan. After leaving the Pakistan Air Force Academy to pursue a career in journalism, he worked for Newsline and the Washington Post, and in 1996 moved to London to work for the BBC. He has written plays for the stage and screen, including a critically acclaimed BBC drama and the feature film The Long Night. Hanif is a graduate of University of East Anglia's creative writing program. His first book, A Case of Exploding Mangoes, was published in 2008. It was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award, won the Shakti Bhatt First Book Prize, and the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Book. After 12 years in England, in 2008, he returned with his wife and son to live here in Karachi. Just last week, he finished a new novel, which I know we are all eager to read. As Julia Slavin wrote in the Washington Post, A Case of Exploding Mangoes, quote, belongs in a tradition that includes Catch-22, but it also calls to mind the biting comedy of Philip Roth, the magical realism of Salman Rushdie, and the feverish nightmares of Kafka. To his predecessors is like trying to compare apples to, well, mangoes. Because Hanif has his own story to tell, one that defies expectations at every turn. Now, I also want to say that while you're in the clapping mindset, that if you clap really, really, really hard, Mohammed Hanif may consent to read from some of his new work. It was pretty good. That was pretty good. But Karachi Literature Festival fans, I know you can do better. So clap your hands together one more time for Mohammed Hanif. So, thank you. Now, I'm going to begin just by asking you a couple of questions, and as I said, I hope that my audience members will step in. In 2009, A Case of Exploding Mangoes won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, as we discussed, and readers like us often have a tendency to assume that all first novels are the stuff of autobiography. In this case, you were writing from the perspective of your character, Ali Shigri, a student in Pakistan's Air Force Academy, an institution that you attended. But your book is not an autobiography. Now, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you mined the archive of your own memory to create the world of an Air Force cadet. And what role did your life as a journalist play a part in the development of the novel? You described writing this book as an act of, quote, frustrated journalist's revenge.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it is true. It was a frustrated journalist's revenge. I mean, as a journalist, we kind of sometimes try to do stories which we know that we can't do because we don't have the information, and people who are supposed to have the information, either they don't have it, they don't want to give it to you, and it's concealed in kind of, sort of there are layers after layers after layers of like lies that you're told. And that's what I came up against. I tried to interview some of these old generals and some of these State Department types who happened to be around here in Pakistan in 1988. And it was very clear to me, like, sort of within a few weeks, that there is no way in hell that I'm ever going to find out that how this plane went down. Uh, so I think that's when I sort of decided that can't, uh, if you can't find out the truth, then you sort of make it up, which is what other people have done here. And and there's a strange kind of after uh, sort of taste to this book, because I've been meeting sort of, sometimes you run into somebody important like a former general or somebody, and this has happened to me. And first I found it amusing, and then I found it scary that somebody will put their arm around your shoulder, take you into a corner, and said, "What a brilliant book, beta. Who told you this?" And you like, my God, these people who are running my country. And I got a letter last year, like in the mail. Somebody found my address, my BBC address. It was from a mid-level serving army officer. And the main character in my book, Ali Shigri, he has a sort of house up in the mountains, like. And I come from Okada, which is as plain as anything can be. So it was basically a fantasy type house that and this guy wrote me a long, elaborate letter where he used to visit our house. He used to go on shikar and drink with my older brothers. And my older brother is a Haji Saab, like never done shikar, never. And there's nobody kind of who's remotely kind of even has a name which even rhymes with Shigri. But this guy had written me like a 3 pages long earnest letter where he'd kind of, spend lovely holidays in in our house. So I don't know, sometimes you kind of lose this kind of, what's fact and what's fiction. In fact, somebody sent me a novel from Lahore, like a young journalist. And and then he called me up, like, a day later, as, young, earnest writers do, that, what do you think of it? And I said, I haven't read it yet, but I will read it and get back to you. He said, you will like it. I said, look, sort of give me a chance to make up my mind. He said, no, because you will like it, it's the truth. I said, look, it's a novel. Why is it the truth? And then I asked him, what does he do? And he's a sub-editor in, sort of one of our big Urdu papers. So I said, you kind of print lies in your newspaper and you write the truth in your novel. That's slightly fucked up. But I don't know. He just, I hope he wasn't offended. But he did say that I don't own the newspaper, so I just work here. So it's like, I just do what they tell me to do. And,
It's so interesting. I mean, thinking about the intermingling of fact and fiction and this kind of the dual inheritance, if you will, of those missions. And I wonder, I mean, you're an eminent journalist in addition to a novelist, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of your recent experiences. You were in Ramallah when protests in Egypt erupted last week, and you asked people around you to put what was happening in Egypt into context. And it's a fascinating thing that you happened to be in Palestine at that time. And you asked them whether something like this could happen in Palestine. You wrote, quote, it was the obvious tourist question, but they were generous, as they had been asking the same question of each other. Later, they asked you if similar protests might take place in Pakistan. And I wonder if you could tell us what it felt like to be in Palestine at this historic moment, and perhaps what we can learn here from what is happening across the Arab world.
Well, I mean, as I'm no expert. I was there like for 10 days, and I was teaching children in Barzit University, which is one of the oldest universities just outside Ramallah. And I was staying in Ramallah, which sort of, as some of you probably know, is the posh bit of Palestine. Like the real misery kind of happens in Gaza. The kids used to joke, like when this Million March was happening in Egypt, and they would ask each other, so what's happening in Gaza? So like, million men starve. So they were, so Palestine was, it's like, sort of a part of humanity, but basically living in a cage. And I'm sure there are people kind of, who've described it much, much better. But it is like, sort of you basically lose your humanity. It's like, sort of if you want to see what it's like to live, sort of surrounded by these so-called human beings and to be treated like an animal day after day after day. And the scariest thing that I found was that all Israeli officials army, police, immigration officials, they're all kids. They're all 18 years old, boys and girls. And you kind of sometimes want to go up to them and slap them. Not just like you sometimes want to slap teenagers because they're just being irritating or you don't like their face. And they scare the hell out of you because they've got these guns that you've only seen, like, sort of in really hardcore action movies. Like, you don't even kind of, see them anywhere else. So it's a scary, but they're very, very courageous lot. Like, sort of, we were taken off this bus, which happens to everyone every day. And you would think that by now, this has happened for so long that these people would be covering. No, I saw these old men kind of, sort of 75-year-old and kind of, just giving hell to kind of, this Israeli kid in his own language. Jaise hum Urdu mein kehte hain, maan behan ki, sort of in front of the whole bus. So they don't take it lying down. They kind of, and they, for some strange reason, they kind of love to party. I mean, Ramallah is full of like cafes that stay open till 5 a.m. in the morning. And I was joking with this Palestinian businessman. I said, it just seems that the only reason you guys wanted freedom was so that you can have a cafe society of your own, which is what they seem to do. But the funniest thing I was asked, went through Jordan and the Jordanian immigration. I think I kind of realized that Jordanian Israelis, they probably go to the same school because their line of questioning were kind of similar. And this Jordanian brother kept insisting, he couldn't get this in his head. He kept saying, you're a Muslim and you don't speak Arabic? I tried like all my inshallah, mashallah, kalma, but he couldn't, it was just unfathomable to him. So he was obviously, padha likha, had been to university. But it was like, if you're a Muslim, you don't speak Arabic. How? So he was very confused about this.
What did it feel like to you? I mean, in the 10 days that you were there, to being a Pakistani in Palestine, how did people interact with you when
People were a bit mildly curious that what is a Pakistani doing here? Because in Ramallah, you get lots of NGO workers from the West, like, from Europe and America. There are lots of kind of, good-hearted kids who come there and kind of, do their try and help out people and kids, and so there are all kinds of NGOs there. So, but they don't really see anybody from Pakistan very often. So they're mildly surprised, and then some kids actually complain to me, and these are obviously well-off kids who get to travel outside of Palestine. And they told me recently, what has started happening? That these people, we go to America, we land at an airport, we tell them who you are, say Palestinian, and they mistake us for Pakistanis and treat us badly. And I thought, like, it couldn't get any worse than being a Palestinian. But these kids were serious. I mean, yeah.
Your course in Palestine was called Writing from Life, and I wondered what kinds of, if you imagine that we're your students, what kinds of lessons were you imparting to these young Palestinian kids or college-age kids about writing from life? Again, I'm thinking about sort of this mingling of fact and fiction and documenting contemporary reality that you've done so brilliantly.
I mean, this was my first attempt at teaching. I've never taught before. So basically, I just asked around, like, friends. I have friends who kind of teach creative writing regularly. So they'd given me some exercises, and then I did the thing that everybody does. I Googled how to teach creative writing. And I got some exercises. And, but they were all girls for some strange reason. There were no boys. So only, it seems, girls kind of want to write. Boys are kind of busy doing other stuff. So I basically I asked them to kind of write their kind of real stories, and then kind of, sort of embellish them a bit. And then one thing that I wanted to try, I was a bit reluctant, but I did try. There was a very famous Pakistani film called Zarqa. You guys remember, it was set in Palestine, and it has a very famous, lovely song by Habib Jalib. It's called Raqs Zanjeer Pehen Kar Bhi Kiya Jata Hai. So I was running out of ideas, so I showed them this song. And I didn't tell them anything. I said, sort of watch this song, and then take on whichever character you want to take on, and then write from that character's perspective that what's going on. And my God, it was a riot. because they wrote such funny, hilarious things that we just couldn't stop laughing like for half an hour. Somebody became like an Israeli general who's hungry and wanted to go home, and like somebody like took on like, this guy Ijaz who's singing, like, he's constantly concerned about his body, like, sort of look at my muscles.
So there's something about a Pakistani film song that freed their creative muse.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think Lollywood worked finally for somebody.
You've been active not just outside of Pakistan in encouraging new writing and emerging writers, young writers, but also within Pakistan. And you've recently been involved in bringing Urdu fiction to new audiences in English. One thing that I read recently, you recently translated a piece of risque Urdu fiction for the new Life's Too Short literary review, the first